Everybody's heard about the bird. Bird, bird, bird. The bird's a word. Well, a bird, bird, bird. Bird is a word. Well, a bird, bird, bird. Well, a bird is a word. Well, a bird, bird, bird. The bird's a word. Well, a bird, bird, bird. Well, a bird is a word. Well, a bird, bird. The bird's a word. Well, don't you know about the bird? Well, everybody knows that the bird is a word. Well, a bird.
Hi, my name is Chris Lenchen. I blog at anabaptistly.wordpress.com. I am one of the MennoNerds. Anabaptism is global and it's diverse, and we need to hear those stories. This is an interview of Darnell, Regina, and Pastor John from the Philippines. Darnell, with his wife Christina and their two boys Cody and Mackay, are Mennonite Church Canada witness workers. They've been in the Philippines for 3 years, serving 1 year as peace and reconciliation workers of Peace Builders Community in Mindanao in the Philippines. Mindanao is an area recovering from the continued impact of a very recently settled 400-year armed conflict dating back to the Spanish colonization in the 1500s. The Barkmans are in their second year with the new Peace Church Philippines in Metro Manila. Peace Church has initiated and is developing the Philippines Anabaptist Network, a gathering of leaders from every sector who discuss and act the Anabaptist Christian perspective. Regina Mondez is a Filipino Mennonite, a member of Peace Church Philippines, and the national coordinator of the Integrated Mennonite Church of the Philippines, where her father is a Mennonite pastor. Reg has served in the church her whole life, and in the last 4 years worked with 2 different peace-building organizations in conflicts. One of them was between the Moro Islamic Liberation Front and the government of the Philippines, and also the other conflict she worked within was the Communist Party of the Philippines and that of the government of the Philippines. Pastor John Soriano is a former Catholic who turned Baptist during seminary in the 1990s, which happens to be the best decade ever. That's the same time, around the same time that he discovered the Anabaptist movement. He is a pastor of Church 71 in San Pedro, Laguna, and he is passionate about peace theology and its newfound significance in the Philippine local and national context. This was a really good conversation, and I tried my best to evoke stories, to hear stories of what they were doing, how they were doing it, and how Anabaptist and the Anabaptist perspective influenced them. Here it is. I have the distinct privilege to interview people from around the world, all the way in the Philippines. My friend Darnell, give us a wave and a hi, Darnell.
Hey.
With Darnell, we've got Reg.
Hi.
And we've got John.
Mabuhay from the Philippines.
Ooh, classic.
So, I think the best way to start a conversation like this would be to get a sense, particularly from Reg and John, on what your journey into Anabaptism was like. So, how do you identify yourselves as Anabaptists? And what was the story there?
Maybe start with Reg. Me? I grew up in an Anabaptist church. Actually, until I was 7, I was with a conservative Mennonite church. My dad is a pastor, and so since I was born, I've been like basically in an Anabaptist community, and so until now, like I could feel like I'm probably like born in this identity, and I've known no other like church culture. So I continue to embrace that.
So so was this kind of a local Anabaptist thing? Was it a church started by missionaries? What's the history of the Anabaptist church that you grew up in?
The conservative Mennonite church that I grew up in are like basically started by American Mennonite missionaries, and then we later on moved to the Integrated Mennonite Church, which was started by the Eastern Mennonite Missions here in the Philippines, and that's basically the church that I grew up in, like, since I was 7 years old until now, and like I'm still totally a part of that. The Integrated Mennonite Church has 21 congregations around the northern part of the Philippines, and I'm actually currently serving as the national coordinator for the IMC.
Cool. So what kind of work do you do with that role then, with the network?
Basically, making sure that there's constant communication, because the way the IMC churches are located, they're in like the isolated areas and like the mountainous areas of the provinces, and so like my role was basically to make sure there's communication among the church leaders of those congregations.
Cool. Cool. Okay, so Reg, what is your journey into Anabaptism? How do you distinguish yourself as Anabaptist?
Sorry, I think you mean John.
Oh yeah, sorry, John.
Oh, okay.
Answer the question, Reg. Come on.
Well, yeah, like most Filipinos here in the Philippines, I grew up as a Roman Catholic. I had grand uncles who are priests, and I had an aunt who was a nun in the Catholic Church. But during the early 90s, I accepted the Lord as my personal Lord and Savior, you know, and became an evangelical Christian, a Baptist. But I have not yet known about the Anabaptists then. But when I was in seminary in the mid-90s, I took this course in transformation theology, and I took some courses in building Christian communities, and that was the first time I encountered the Anabaptists. Even in church history, I started to learn about them, and that was my first exposure with the Anabaptists, and a lot of the distinctives there that was described in history very much resonated with the way I would want to envision the church here in the Philippines. So that was the first encounter with Anabaptists.
What were some of those distinctives that you really resonated with, that you connected with?
Well, the emphasis on community very much resonated within the Filipino culture. Very communal, very family oriented, and the church being gathering in small communities. That's very much similar to what Filipinos are, and even tribal cultures here in the Philippines are very much like that, very communal.
And so that ends up being a natural connecting point for Anabaptism in the Filipino culture then?
Yes. Yeah.
I'd like to offer the same question to Reg. So what are some of the distinctives then that you really ended up resonating with? My story is kind of similar. I grew up in a Mennonite church. My dad was a pastor, and I just kind of went through the motions of going to church because my dad was a pastor at a Mennonite church. It wasn't only until I was a young adult that I really started to resonate with some of the elements of Anabaptism, and so I guess the question is, what are some of the things for you, Reg, too, that really started to resonate?
It's actually during my college years, I was in a university where there's like a lot of activists, and growing up in a church culture where I've known no other culture, I feel like it's like the only thing I've known. But when I was outside the church and like, being exposed to Anabaptists, to activism and to like the Philippine realities, that's where I started to appreciate the way like I was raised in the church and the way I appreciate serving other people as a follower of Jesus. And then after I finished college, I worked with Peace Builders Community, which was based in the war-affected areas in Mindanao, and people have been appreciating the Anabaptists, and they've been expressing how they appreciate that, and that's when I started. That's where I began to look back to how the Anabaptist Church really raised me, and how it has embedded in me the teaching of like serving the way Jesus would, and like seeing others in the way Jesus would see them, and like serving the poor, and like that has become so much more meaningful when I started to go outside the church and see the harsh realities of what my country's facing.
What are some of those harsh realities? And I think the segue is kind of nice, and I'd like to get Darnell as well to kind of pipe up on this. What are some of those realities, and what is that collision between Anabaptism and the Filipino context? What does that look like? What are some of the things that are emerging between?
Yeah, I think I'll start this one maybe because I mean, my story is similar to Reg because I grew up in the Mennonite church in MB conference, and I think growing up I felt like I was pretty much a normal evangelical. I didn't really understand the Anabaptist distinctives growing up in a Mennonite family, and then after I was able to go on a short-term missions trip to Thailand just after I graduated high school, and then I traveled in the Caribbean, and I saw some of these harsh realities of the world, from moving from Abbotsford, the Bible Belt, to all over the world where we have injustice and poverty and some of these things that I just never experienced in Abbotsford. I started to question kind of the evangelical gospel of going to heaven primarily, and look at the realities I saw around me and go, well, if the gospel is just that we go to heaven, then it's really not good news to all people. So I sat down with a real relevant question. Either the gospel isn't actually good news to all people, and it's not relevant to most of the world, or my understanding of the gospel is wrong. And so that, for me, that's what really kick-started my deeper Anabaptist journey, and I became really thankful that in my family and my church there was such a focus on reading the Gospels and focusing on Jesus the person, and that kind of drew me back to my Anabaptist roots in a stronger way. So then when we came to the Philippines and started realizing that in the Philippines there's two major wars because of injustice, or not wars, armed conflicts, in the south between an indigenous group that's Muslim, that their land had been taken through colonization in about 400 years ago. And then in the north, there's a communist movement that's fighting because of injustice and trying to get land back, agrarian reform, trying to correct some of the poverty and the big divide between the rich and the poor in this country. And so the Anabaptist witness of serving the poor as a church, of initiating peace-building work to go into the field and meet. In our case, in my case, my story in the Philippines started with going into the field with Peace Builders community and meeting Muslims and just building relationships with Muslim leaders, religious leaders, and asking, so what's your story? Why are you guys fighting? We don't want to just be like the rest of the world that says, you know, Muslims are all terrorists. We don't buy that. So can you tell us your story? And so that's one of the contexts in that, where we were able to build relationships between the military and the church and some of these different groups through the relationships God gave us and some of our other Filipino Anabaptist leaders. And the Mennonite church has helped lead or encourage a lot of evangelical churches to bridge the gap between especially Muslims and the military. And actually 4 days ago, the final peace agreement was signed to start to create a new peace zone, basically like a province in the south. And that's one of the most current live stories of Anabaptism in the Philippines, touching the context. Yeah. What do you guys think?
Yeah, with me too personally, I started reflecting more on Anabaptism when I studied development communication, and that's where we were faced with the realities of poverty in the Philippines, and I've started going to different places and interviewing people who are in poverty or experiencing real poverty, and I've never experienced that my whole life. And growing up in the church too, I was just in my comfort zone, and then that's when I started intentionally and passionately pursuing, like, how do I communicate the gospel to people who are like in poverty, and not just communicating for their development, but how do I communicate the gospel of Jesus, which is like a lot more meaningful than development. So that's when my journey to seeking more what the gospel is like and how I could communicate that to the Filipino people. That's when it started, and yeah, so until now, that's been what I was doing, like working with Peace Builders community, and recently working with an organization that deals with the armed conflict between the government and the communist group, and like I could see the connection between what I'm doing and how I actually understand the gospel and like practically living it from day to day.
Well, in my case, living in Manila my whole life seems to be somehow detached from the realities of what's happening in Mindanao, what's happening in the communist conflict up north. I just see all this in the newspaper, and very much detached. And Manila, as a highly urbanized area, I mean, and me being nurtured in a Baptist church, all of this talk about justice, there were some talks about poverty, but not really in the sense of asking why people are poor. It seems that the church that I grew up in would tend to focus more on spiritual kinds of stuff, which is good, I think. But then what really struck me when I was studying Anabaptists is the very quote of Menno Simons. I was telling them about this for several weeks now, because I was unable to unearth my old papers, and I saw I wrote there that while Martin Luther said that the just shall live by faith, Menno Simons said the just will live his faith. And it's the same kind of question that really struck me. Having the context of poverty, and even in highly urbanized areas, there's much poverty that we can see around. Informal settlers, the urban poor communities. But then somehow, if you live here, you somehow became sanitized. You get used to the surroundings. It's like a backdrop. But anyway, starting to ask questions, how will I live my faith in these kinds of contexts, and asking, not simply meeting the need of the poor, but start to ask why people are poor. That kind of question here is very dangerous, because right away, a lot of evangelicals would brand you as a communist. If you respond you give to the poor, they'll treat you as a saint. But if you start to ask why people are poor, then that's eyebrows are raised, and they would suspect you as some kind of sympathizer of the left-leaning groups. So,
well, and it's such a bold question to ask, I think, and to have our faith, our Anabaptist discipleship, Christocentric, shalom, loving, peace people, asking these dangerous questions. We find that questions, when they engage our local context in a very specific way, and if we take our faith seriously enough, we end up on the margins and being very, very subversive, and working towards a pretty important stuff. And I love that at its core, when you guys are talking about your Anabaptist engagements and what are the things that have connected you to Anabaptism, the part that's done it is the peace work, right? I mean, that's the one thing that's very, very obvious in our short little conversation here, and that's something that gives us hope, I think. One of the symptoms, I think, in North America we see is we have these nice middle-class churches, and so it's easy for us to sometimes neglect this the marginalized and the people who we are kind of called to build relationships with, and ask that very question that you're asking John about. Okay, so we're feeding people, that's great, but why are people hungry in the first place? And to have that intricately connected with our faith is something very beautifully holistic.
And well, in light of our peace work, Reg and I were both staff of Peace Builders Community, and John's been living here in Manila, just growing towards Anabaptism in a lot of ways. Out of our peace work in Mindanao, we were able to develop relationships with indigenous people, Muslim religious leaders, and other churches that were unfamiliar with the Anabaptist perspective. And from all three groups, we heard, well, if you guys are Mennonites, so where's your Mennonite church? If what you're doing is following Jesus, and this is the Jesus from Scripture, where are your churches? And so there's this Mennonite church movement in the Philippines, but they're a small, kind of rural, and I guess their witness hadn't been as their witness is still growing, and so we were encouraged to come back 4 years after our initial term in Mindanao, in the southern Philippines, and help gather this Anabaptist community that's been growing in Manila. And so we are Peace Church Philippines. There's about, if all of us come together, there's about 25. Usually there's between 10 and 15 during the week when we meet on the middle of the week. And everyone's really involved with living out their Anabaptist faith in daily life in really interesting different ways. One guy has started like a community library out of his garage, and he gathers people weekly, up to 45, to host seminars. On the weekend, they have a church where they play street games with the kids. Like we would play kick the can. They have indigenous kids games, and then they read Bible stories after, and they feed the kids from the neighborhood. Reg is involved with the peace work. John has a house church in about 45 minutes south. We're involved with other different peace advocacies, as well as involved at seminary and kind of fleshing out as a community, what does it mean to engage the world from an Anabaptist perspective. And we keep hearing these inklings when we travel of people saying, oh, we've heard of Peace Church, or how is Peace Church responding to this or that? And we're really a small, relatively insignificant group in numbers, but God's been able to bless us with just a network that we've been able to touch in different ways. And I know it's been kind of exciting. We made a video after our 1-year anniversary, and the word that kept coming up when people were reflecting on what's the last year being was kind of like this movement to be a voice to the evangelical church of what it means to seek shalom as God's will, or as the embodiment of the kingdom of God, rather than just spiritual or just social things, but these come together in Jesus' witness, and we want to be a community that worship that way and embody that. So, yeah.
What would your holistic dream for ministry be with the Anabaptist network in the Philippines? What are you doing now that's giving you some deep-seated hope, and where do you see it going in the future? What are some of the future hopes that you would have?
Well, in my travel, I see, similar to my own experience in North America, these people popping up, groups popping up that are just asking the question, how can the church look more like Jesus? And so, like, even Brian, this guy who has a community library, an info shop, they call it, he's connecting with the anarchist network, and anarchists are generally non-Christian anarchists. You're familiar with the Christian anarchists, Jesus radicals, but the non-Christian anarchists are generally pretty socialist, pretty leaning towards violence against capitalism, and generally they're atheists, well, he's connected with this anarchist network, and they're proud that they're connected to Peace Church. And the way we approach our witness as Shalom, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to say we don't believe in oppression and top-down, but community should be holistic. And so they've moved from atheists to, what do they call themselves? Agnostics. And they're journeying with us, and they'll openly say they're journeying with us, and they've committed now that they're not going to be involved with violence, that they'll only approach communities with nonviolent action for transformation, not violent action hoping for some kind of justice and transformation. So I mean, that's one picture, but that's more an extreme. The more general in my experience, like I say, is it's just people in other churches or people who are saying, like, how is the church addressing this issue? And we can just say, well, from our perspective and how we read Scripture and our experience as a community, this is how we step out and try to touch poverty in a long-term way instead of just addressing the felt need, but, okay, what's the structural issue behind that? And that's building shalom, and that's reconciliation with God and then with others. So, what do you guys think?
Okay, ikaw rin, sige.
I think with Peace Church, at least now, we're enjoying the beauty of like the people, like when we meet together, and then we all have different networks. Like I work with, like I do peace work with the communist groups, and then there's like Dakwe Brian doing the community library. Like we each in our own communities, when we go back, like we gather at Peace Church, we share together, we study the Scripture together, and then we go back to our sphere of influence, and then we carry that, and then it's like a ripple, like we influence, and then the people that we influence get to influence others too, and we're still currently on a journey of really defining like how the Anabaptist network in the Philippines would really look like, and yeah, I think we're still in that phase where we're currently enjoying where we are, but then together we're like still figuring out like what's it gonna be like in the next 10 years or I don't know.
Yeah, well, I think the challenge really is to really live it out, to embody, this Anabaptist impulse, even within churches. But it's a good thing that Peace Church could be the embodiment of that, would embody that, so that if people would ask, what does that look like? Could you describe it for us? Then we have this community that's journeying together towards a community that really shows what it means to be living under the reign of God. So, and I think too that the challenge for us now is that is not just to embody, but how to influence and help out other churches to see a more holistic approach in ministry. Shalom. So I think that's the challenge still, because a lot of churches here in the Philippines actually are, I should say, it's like carbon copies of the churches in North America. So every denomination in America you have here in the Philippines, and so the kind of the brand of Christianity that came over here is that a lot of them are similar to the conservative right-wing Republican type of Christianity. So things like that. So really, it's the challenge of relating with other churches and somehow influencing.
That must be an interesting dynamic for Filipinos to have a bunch of North American style churches that are like full on white and just kind of that North American quality, big box quality to them. So what's it like? I love the word influence because it kind of it assumes in essence a bit of a relationship And so when we think about bridge building and interacting with people, that's a good way to do it. So how do you do that in a Filipino context with churches that are from North America?
I'm involved with Micah Challenge Philippines, and Micah Challenge is actually the local advocacy that advocates for try to mobilize churches to respond to the UN Millennium Development Goals. That's next year, 2015, to cut poverty in half. So as Micah advocates, we actually cascade what we call integral mission. It's basically holistic ministry. It's really shalom theology. And so we go around churches, we work with denominations, and conduct seminars with regards to that. And I think the missing link there, in my experience, is that while we cascade this kind of framework, this more shalom framework, the missing link there, I think, is an appropriate ecclesiology, or an appropriate theology of church that would embody that shalom theology. And we just don't want to just download theological stuff and some kind of another paradigm. Well, it's a paradigm shift actually, but we don't want it to be just that, but really to live it out in real community, an authentic community. And I think that it would be a challenge for them to rethink or to reimagine their, the existing face of their churches. So things like that. I think that's the missing link there, and it would be good to teach them, revisit the Anabaptist history, or it's our Christian heritage. Anabaptists are part of the the long history of our Christian heritage. That I think that it would be good to revisit these communities and see what it means today. How it would be relevant for today.
Beautiful. I am given hope by your stories about peace and a nitty-gritty discipleship that you guys are talking about. And I know from the stories that you've told here that it's very relational, it's very contextual, and you're figuring it out as you go. And there's an element of, it's almost poetic, a poetic ecclesiology when you get a community together, figuring out life together in a particular time and a particular place, and practicing Anabaptists as you folks are. I am given hope by your words and your stories here. For you, it's morning. For me, it's almost supper time. And so it's a beautiful part about technology. My goodness, Darnell and I had a heck of a time trying to figure out the time change. And so it's almost a miracle that we managed to actually schedule this interview. But I wanted to, on behalf of MennoNerds.com and the people who will be listening to this, watching this, probably my mom, I know for sure will be, and others, maybe Darnell's mom and parents too.
Yeah. Grandparents for sure. My in-laws definitely.
But thank you, and I before we go, I just wanted to get a few words from you guys about what you guys are doing for your futures. I know Darnell is hard at work with his missionary stuff, and so John, what's kind of on the horizon for you?
Well, I'll still be doing some advocacy work for Micah Challenge Philippines. We have a team there that goes around the Philippines, continuously doing the seminars, and locally. I am trying to work with our barangay. It's the local neighborhood So the first experience of governance here in the Philippines is the barangay. So that's a local level. Well, anyway, so I try to relate with people there. I have a friend who is a part of the council. So we'll see what we can do together. We still have to talk, but I'm hopeful that even in that level of governance, I may be able to influence people.
How would you, Reg?
I'm actually on a journey right now to writing a book, which I wanted to call The Filipino Anabaptist. So basically, it's divided in 3 parts. So the first part, I'll talk about like my life story as growing up in Filipino Anabaptist and being born in an Anabaptist family and stuff like that. The second part, I'm currently interviewing people who didn't necessarily grow up in Anabaptist cultures, but embraced Anabaptism, like Pedro here, and a bunch of other people, and I've interviewed theologians and asking them how they understand Anabaptism and how their appreciation with it in contrast with the cultures, the church cultures that they grew up in. And then the third part, I wanted to talk about basically contrast of Anabaptist theology with the Filipino culture, like what are the similarities of this culture with our very own culture, and like how it basically fit, and if there are any other like parts of the Anabaptist theology that won't necessarily fit in this culture. So like I'm still on a journey to writing that, and hopefully in the next year or next 2 years I'm going to finish that.
Very cool.
So is anyone out there from Herald Press or Mennonite World Conference or IVP? We're just giving you the first shot at the contract for the publisher.
You can email me now.
Now we'll start a bidding process very low, but we have high standards.
Awesome. Darnell, you're doing your with your wife and your 2 kids, almost 3 kids, so I guess 2.5 kids we could safely say. You're doing your missionary thing. Tell us what you got in the hopper for that.
We're working on developing this Anabaptist network more formally as Peace Church community. We're trying to bridge the gap and discern, along with an NGO partner we have, Peace Builders Community. It's also led by Mennonite Church Canada missionaries. We're trying to discern what does it look like to be a community that is a worshiping community and involved with living that Anabaptist life at the community level. And they're kind of figuring out what does it mean to be an NGO that's also, engaging as a worshiping community and blur those lines a bit. So we're developing kind of some strategy on that, and we're exactly what Reg is doing. We're trying to encourage people to keep doing that. We want to create kind of social media stuff, create physical events where people can discover the Anabaptist perspective, and we're trying to not push people that this is, you're not becoming a different denomination. Anabaptism isn't a denomination. We're not trying to make you Mennonites. It's not about that and converting you, but like we just realized that the Anabaptist distinctive is there was this group of people that said we choose to follow Jesus consciously. That's what baptism meant, and it's very simply like was it that Anabaptist historian Arnold Snyder said that I think that was really the Anabaptist distinctive. It wasn't so much the peace thing and all that. It was this choosing to follow Jesus and then walking with a community who does that. And so we're trying to continue to be that. It's a lot of theology of presence, being present, and we're present physically, Peace Church, in a wealthy neighborhood because we're trying to address some of the injustices involved with armed conflict here. So we're trying to connect with arms dealers, with business people, with people who control the gas and oil industry, and whose businesses can do a lot of damage, may do a lot of damage in this culture and in the money, in the capitalism and stuff. But also, what's that?
Even the World Bank.
Even the World Bank. I mean, a lot of our neighbors here are from ADB and the World Bank in this community. But we're trying to, within that and within those relationships, challenge people and be a witness that you can live and have your business or your whatever to be a blessing, to be transformative in culture, not to just money doesn't have to be the bottom line. For example, we talked about this before off air, but we have a coffee shop called Coffee for Peace, which is a fair trade coffee shop. We walk with farmers, we journey with farmers to bring their coffee from the ground planted to coffee shops all over the Philippines as well in North America. The Juno Awards were just serving Coffee for Peace coffee. I think they were the official sponsors in Canada. And so we demonstrate and we walk with farmers that this is all based on shalom, following Jesus to bring harmony with God, harmony with others, and harmony with creation. And so we have a business that is a for-profit business, but we want to do it with serving people and do it in a sustainable way. And then 25% of the profit of that goes to support ministry for peace and reconciliation work in conflict areas. So check out coffeeforpeace.org, I think. And then for us, you can check out peacechurch.ph, and it's got links to Facebook and stuff. And yeah, so that's kind of what's going on. And like Reg said, we're about 2 years old, so we're really kind of journeying and finding our identity and stuff.
Oh, that's so awesome. On behalf of MennoNerds.com and nerds everywhere, thank you very much for taking the time to do this interview and sharing your stories and offering us hope in how you live and what is developing and how peace is in the Philippines. It's beautiful. So thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks.